My pack left me to die in the snow. Unaware I carried the Alpha King's pup. The wind howled like a living thing across the frozen highlands of Arindor. The stone fell in relentless sheets, blurring the shapes of trees and cliffs, covering the world in endless white. Somewhere in that whiteness, a figure stumbled, her body weak, her breath ragged. Leora, once proud of her pack, now alone, dragged herself through the snow, each step heavier than the last. Her fingers, raw and red, clawed at the ice, seeking purchase on the jagged rocks that jutted from the mountain path. Dace, she remembered the attack, the betrayal. Her pack had turned on her, leaving her for dead as the storm swept across the valley. Their eyes had been cold, and their voices had called her a failure. Leora had fought, begged, pleaded, but no claw, no word of loyalty had been returned. She had been nothing to them, nothing but a shadow to be discarded in the frost. And yet, despite the fear, despite the freezing wind biting at her skin, there was something stirring inside her that refused to die. Something small and fragile. A life that belonged not just to her but to someone she did not know yet would shape the fate of kingdoms. She could feel it in the quiet of her bones, the warmth that refused to vanish even in the snow. She carried the Alpha King's pup. The thought should have terrified her. The Alpha King was not a man to be trifled with. His wolves were many, and his anger like fire in the cold. Yet even as she stumbled, slipping into a snowdrift, Leora could not deny the pulse of hope that came with the small life inside her. A life she could not abandon, no matter what her pack had done, no matter what the blizzard demanded of her. Hours, maybe days, passed. Time was a blur in the storm. She crawled across ridges, dragged herself over frozen streams, and sank into snowbanks, exhausted. Her lips were cracked, her skin burned by frost, yet she whispered to the life within her. "You will not die," she said, voice thin as ice cracking, "not while I breathe." The mountains around her were silent, except for the wind and the distant cries of wolves. The echoes were cruel reminders that she was alone, forsaken. And yet, she moved. Dusk. She had to. The thought of surrendering, of letting the snow take her, made her stomach twist in fear. Suddenly a shadow moved across the whiteness ahead, a shape that did not belong to the wind or the trees. Leora froze, every nerve alert. Her heart thudded, a slow drum against the quiet. The figure was tall, broad-shouldered, wrapped in a cloak dark as midnight, moving with a grace that made the snow seem to bend around him. The Alpha King. He stopped a few paces from her, eyes sharp and piercing, silver like winter light reflecting off ice. He looked at her with a gaze that was neither kindness nor cruelty, but something older, deeper, a curiosity that seemed to pierce through the layers of frost and fear. "You should not be here," he said, voice low, steady, yet carrying a weight that made her shiver in more than just the cold. I'm not afraid," Leora whispered, though her teeth chattered and her body trembled. "I'm not a threat, Busta." He studied her, his expression unreadable. "Few survive the storm of the highlands," he said finally. "Fewer still carry what you carry." Her breath caught. She dared not speak, dared not reveal the secret that she did not yet understand herself. And yet the truth seemed to reach him anyway. His eyes flickered, sharp as the edge of a blade, and Leora felt the weight of his gaze sink into her bones. "You bear my blood," he said, words heavy with meaning. "And yet you survive." A mix of fear and defiance rose inside her. I don't know what will happen," she said. "I only know I must live." For it. The Alpha King's eyes softened for the briefest moment, just enough for Leora to feel something stir inside her that was unfamiliar. Hope, perhaps, or the echo of trust long forgotten. "Come," he commanded, extending a gloved hand. "The storm will not wait, and neither will your child." Leora hesitated. Every instinct screamed to run, to hide, to trust no one. Yet exhaustion, the relentless cold, and the faint warmth of life within her drew her forward. She took his hand. It was strong, sure, and oddly comforting. With his help, she rose, wobbling, shivering, and together they moved through the blizzard. The fortress of the Alpha King rose ahead, dark against the white expanse, jagged towers reaching to the gray sky. Smoke curled from chimneys, a faint sign of life in the desolation. Yet even as they approached, Leora could feel the tension of the walls, the power that thrummed like a heartbeat beneath the stone. She was no guest, no mere survivor. She was a secret that could shift the balance of kingdoms. Inside the fortress, the air was warmer, heavy with the scent of wood smoke and iron. Servants and guards paused, eyes wide, sensing the presence of someone both dangerous and precious. Leora, wrapped in blankets, felt her body thaw, but her mind remained alert. Every shadow, every whisper felt like a test. She did not trust easily. Not now, not ever again. The Alpha King led her to a chamber near the heart of the fortress. It was simple, yet grand, with tapestries depicting the history of Arindor and the feats of past Alphas. Leora sank onto the fur-covered bed, her body shaking with relief and fear. "You will be safe here," he said, almost to himself, as if promising more than she could hear. And yet, his voice trailed, and for a moment she glimpsed the weight of a ruler who had fought countless battles, yet knew this challenge was unlike any other. The pup within her stirred, a tiny movement that sent waves of tenderness and panic through her chest. She placed a hand over it, closing her eyes. She had survived the storm, the betrayal, and the wilderness. Perhaps she could survive this too. But even as she rested, the fortress walls were not as safe as they seemed. Outside, shadows moved, eyes in the dark, wolves that whispered of old grudges, and figures who would stop at nothing to claim the power she carried. Leora's heart tightened. The fight was only beginning. And then, just as sleep threatened to pull her under, she heard it, a howl, sharp and desperate, echoing across the frozen highlands. It was not the wind. Not the wolves. It carried a message she could not yet understand, a warning she could not ignore. Leora's eyes snapped open. She felt the stir of life within her, her pulse racing. The Alpha King stood at the window, gaze fixed on the distant darkness. His face was unreadable, yet there was a tension in his shoulders, a silent recognition of danger. "They're coming," he whispered. And in that moment, Leora realized survival was no longer just about enduring the storm. It was about protecting the secret she carried, surviving those who would kill for it, and facing a destiny that neither she nor the Alpha King could yet see. Outside, the blizzard raged. Inside, the walls of the fortress seemed fragile against the cold, the shadows, and the unknown. Leora clutched her stomach, feeling the tiny heartbeat of the pup she carried, and knew this: the world had not yet claimed her. She would fight, no matter the cost. The howl came again, closer now, haunting and urgent. And Leora understood, with a shiver of both fear and resolve, that the storm was not behind her. It was only just beginning. The fortress of the Alpha King loomed over the snow-covered highlands, black stone rising from frozen ground like a crown of shadow. Inside, corridors twisted like veins, carrying the pulse of power through every hall. Leora walked them cautiously, wrapped in furs, yet every step felt heavy. The warmth of the hearths could not chase the chill from her bones. Not entirely. The memory of betrayal, of being left to die in the storm, lingered like frost on her skin. The Alpha King walked beside her, silent at first, his cloak brushing the stone floor. His presence was overwhelming, not only in size but in command. Each movement, each glance carried authority. And yet, there was something deeper, a quiet curiosity that unnerved her more than the cold ever could. "You fear me," he said finally, voice low and smooth, echoing off the walls. "I should," Leora replied, though she kept her gaze on the floor. "You could turn and leave me in the snow. Or worse." He smiled faintly, almost amused, though there was no warmth in it. "And yet I did not. You survived where others would have failed. That tells me more about you than I expected." Leora's chest tightened. Every word from him was measured, deliberate. She could not tell if he admired her or if he simply saw a tool she could become. The tension between them was a thread stretched so thin that a single misstep could snap it. The court within the fortress was a world of its own. Brask. Servants moved silently, carrying trays of food and heat, eyes darting to Leora with curiosity and caution. Soldiers sharpened blades in corners, their hands steady, their gazes heavy with suspicion. Leora could feel their judgment, the question unspoken yet present. Who is she, and what does she carry? It was true. Leora carried more than her own survival. She carried the Alpha King's pups. This was a priest that took possession of his static comment in disparting the passage of the day. He could not see the nav against the desert. He cast it around in des peace. She'd never have added the day. Sometimes, in quiet moments, she would place a hand over her stomach, whispering to the child she'd barely understood, promising protection, love, and survival. Yet the Alpha King watched her with an intensity that made her blood quicken. He did not speak often of the child, though she knew he sensed it. Every glance, every measured silence carried weight. Breaths. Sometimes she'd caught him staring at her when he thought she wasn't looking, and in those moments her heart betrayed her, a strange longing, a need she did not fully understand. Days passed, each blending into the next. The storm outside raged on, a constant reminder that the world beyond these walls was harsh, unforgiving, and dangerous. And yet, inside, the tension grew more dangerous than the snow. Leora explored the fortress cautiously, discovering hidden libraries filled with ancient tomes, chambers adorned with trophies of conquest, and halls lined with portraits of Alpha's past. She began to understand the weight of the throne the Alpha King bore, the legacy of war, loyalty, betrayal, and magic. One evening he summoned her to the council hall. Candles flickered, casting long shadows on the walls. Advisors and generals gathered, their eyes sharp, their whispers quick. Leora felt like a bird caught in a cage of power she could not escape.
"You will remain here until we understand what forces pursue you," the Alpha King said, his gaze fixed on her.
"And the child." Leora swallowed hard. She did not fully trust him. Not yet, but she could not refuse. Desert. She had survived the mountains, the snow, and the betrayal of her pack. She would survive here, too. "Why me?" she asked, voice barely above a whisper. "Why not take the pup and leave me behind?" He paused, his eyes dark pools of thought. "Because you are more than you know," he said finally. "And because survival is not only a test of strength, but of will." "You will need both." The days that followed were tense and uncertain. Leora trained quietly, learning the rhythms of the fortress, its hidden passages, and the patterns of the guards. With weapons she had not held since leaving her pack, and each movement reminded her of who she was. A warrior, a survivor, The Alpha King observed her silently, often from the shadows, allowing her space but never fully removing the weight of his presence. Sometimes he would speak in passing, offering advice that seemed practical, yet carried an undercurrent of something else: challenge, expectation, and perhaps care. It was a wolf, but not an ordinary one. Its fur was as dark as midnight, eyes glowing with a cruel intelligence. It prowled the fortress grounds, moving silently, testing the walls and the defenses. Leora saw it first while patrolling near the northern towers, heart hammering. It stopped when it sensed her presence, snarling low, but it did not flee. The Alpha King appeared silently at her side, his presence a shield. "It seeks the pup," he said, voice steady. "Not you, yet it will not hesitate if it can reach it." Leora felt a surge of fear, but it was tempered by determination. First, she would not let this creature claim what was hers to protect. Together they faced it, her body tense, ready. But the wolf vanished before she could strike, leaving only the echo of its growl and the smell of snow and blood in the air. That night, Leora could not sleep. She paced the chamber, tracing circles with her fingers over the warmth beneath her furs. She whispered to the child, promising safety, and promising herself that she would endure whatever came. The Alpha King appeared at the doorway, his figure framed by candlelight. She did not startle. She had grown used to his silent appearances. "They will not wait forever," he said. "Your pack, your enemies, even the forces beyond these walls, they will come." Leora's stomach tightened. "Then we must be ready," she said, her voice firmer than she felt. "I will not fail." For a moment he studied her, as if weighing her soul. Then he nodded once, curtly, almost reluctantly. "Good," he said. "You will need courage, cleverness, and trust. The last will be the hardest for you." In the following days, Leora found herself drawn into the court's quiet intrigues.
Advisors whispered of rebellion in the northern villages, of magical disturbances, and of dark omens seen in the skies. Every word, every glance reminded her that the child she carried was more than a secret. It was a key, a spark of power that could shift kingdoms.
And still, the Alpha King's presence haunted her. He was there in quiet corners, in sudden silences, and in the way his gaze lingered longer than politeness demanded. She resisted, kept her distance, and reminded herself constantly he was not a friend, nor could she fully trust him. Yet in the moments when fear threatened to overwhelm her, his presence became a comfort she could not explain. One evening, Leora walked the outer ramparts, snow swirling around her like silver dust. She thought of the mountains, of the frozen wilderness where her pack had left her to die. Betrayal, loss, and survival. And she thought of the child growing within her, fragile yet fierce, a life she would defend, no matter the cost. A shadow fell across the snow. Leora turned sharply, hand on the hilt of her blade, ready. The Alpha King stepped beside her, his cloak brushing the snow. "You grow stronger," he said softly. "Stronger than I expected." Leora bristled. "You do not know me." "I know enough," he replied, eyes reflecting the moonlight on the snow. "Enough to know you are not alone, and enough to know that your enemies will come, sooner or later. Are you ready?" She did not answer immediately. Her eyes swept the horizon, searching the endless white for threats she could not see. She swallowed hard, feeling the life inside her stir, as if the child sensed the tension too. "I will survive," she said finally, voice steady. "I have survived worse than this." He nodded, almost in approval. "Then you may yet live to see the world change." A sudden howl split the air, a sound not of wind, not of ordinary wolves, but a cry that carried anger, power, and recognition. Leora froze, every muscle taut. "They know. the Alpha King said, his eyes narrowing. They know where you are, and they are coming. Leora's heart thundered in her chest. The fortress, the walls, the firelight, none of it felt safe anymore. She clutched her stomach instinctively, feeling the tiny heartbeat of the pup within her, and realized with a cold certainty the storm was no longer just outside. It was inside, in the fortress, in the court, in the very air around her. The Alpha King moved to the wall, gaze sharp, body coiled for action. Leora felt a shiver run through her, fear, anticipation, and a strange flicker of trust. Whatever was coming, she knew one thing. She could not face it alone. And yet, even with him beside her, she could not shake the memory of betrayal. She had survived the snow, the mountains, and her pack's treachery, but the forces moving now were greater, and she understood with a sinking heart that survival alone would not be enough. Outside, the wind screamed, dusk. Inside, shadows deepened, and in the distance, the sound of claws on stone and whispers of darkness heralded the arrival of something that would change everything. The wind had not stopped. Outside the fortress, the snowstorm raged like a living thing, but inside, the cold had taken a different form. Whispers, shadows, and secrets moving through the halls. Leora felt it in her bones, a chill that was not frost, but fear. The fortress walls, once a sanctuary, now seemed fragile against the storm approaching from within and without. The pup inside her stirred constantly, reminding her that survival was no longer only her own. Every heartbeat, every kick, was a call to protect what she could not yet fully understand. And yet the Alpha King's presence was no longer merely authority or curiosity. It was expectation. He watched her with sharp, silent eyes, weighing each action, each word. "The child is awakening," he said one evening, his voice cutting through the quiet of the chamber. Candles flickered, casting long shadows on the walls. And with it, so do the forces that seek to claim it. Leora tightened her hands over the furs covering her stomach. I will protect it," she whispered. "I have survived storms worse than this." His gaze lingered, unreadable. "Survival is not enough," he said. "You must understand, control, and fight for it. There are enemies you cannot yet see, and betrayals waiting in shadows you cannot imagine." Her pulse quickened. The memory of her pack's treachery came rushing back. The cold, the abandonment, the howl of despair in the snow. And now the world of the Alpha King was layered with dangers she had never imagined, politics, magic, and creatures that lurked beyond the edges of human understanding. She realized with a jolt that the child was more than life. It was a key, a spark that could tip the scales of kingdoms and awaken forces both ancient and merciless. Days turned into nights of tense preparation. Leora trained tirelessly, practicing with blade and bow, learning the fortress's hidden passages, the secret patterns of the guards, and the rhythms of the Alpha King's life. She watched him too, noting the way his hand brushed against walls in thought, the weight of his gaze when he did not think she noticed, the flicker of something almost tender in his silver eyes. And yet, danger moved unseen. One evening, as the sky outside burned with the pale light of winter moons, a shadow slipped through the fortress walls. It was silent, swift, and deliberate. Leora sensed it before she saw it, a presence like cold metal sliding against her spine. She drew her blade, heart hammering. The Alpha King appeared beside her, as if materializing from the darkness itself. "They are here," he said, voice low, edged with steel. "The ones who want the child for themselves." The shadow moved closer, coalescing into a figure cloaked in black, eyes glinting with cruel intelligence. It was no ordinary warrior, no simple assassin. Magic thrummed in the air around it, a pulse that made the candles flicker and the walls hum. Leora's hands shook, but she stood her ground. "I will not let it take the child," she said. voice steady despite the fear twisting in her chest. The figure laughed softly, a sound that carried malice and amusement together. "The child will belong to those with power," it said, "not to the weak or the forsaken." Desk. His hand dropped to the hilt of his sword, the air between them tense and dangerous. "You will not pass," he said. "Not while I live." The shadow moved then, swift as the wind outside. Leora reacted instinctively, stepping forward, blade raised, but the figure was faster, slipping past her, past the guards, as if the walls themselves obeyed its command. The fortress erupted into chaos. The soldiers shouted. Candles spilled wax onto the floors, and the air seemed to crackle with unseen energy. Leora ran, heart pounding, toward the chamber where the child stirred, sensing the danger. The Alpha King followed, cutting a path through the attackers with precise, lethal grace. Every movement, every strike seemed to carry centuries of training, experience, and power. Why? Yet even he was not invincible. One of the shadowed figures slipped past him, claws extended, eyes glowing with a hunger that chilled Leora to the bone. She met it head-on, blade clashing against its weapon. Sparks flew, the sound echoing through the hallways. She fought with everything she had, driven not by skill alone but by desperation, by the life inside her that demanded protection. Hours, or minutes. Time had lost meaning, passed in a blur of steel, shadow, and snow-cold determination. When the fight finally stilled, the hall was wrecked, the attackers gone, leaving only the echoes of their cruelty. Leora's arms shook, her breath came in ragged gasps, and her palms ached. She sank to the floor, clutching her stomach, feeling the child move as if sensing the danger that had just passed. The Alpha King knelt beside her. His hand rested lightly on her shoulder, grounding. "Steady. You are stronger than I imagined," he said softly, his voice carrying a strange warmth. Leora looked up at him, eyes wide with exhaustion and something else she could not name. Fear, relief, longing. It was all tangled inside her like a storm. I cannot fail," she whispered. "You will not fail," he said. "Not if you trust yourself and trust me." The words struck her not as comfort, but as a challenge. She had been betrayed before. She had survived alone. To trust again, to allow herself to depend on another, was harder than any blade, any storm, or any shadowed enemy. And yet, for the first time since the blizzard, she considered the possibility that she was not meant to face the darkness alone. The nights became longer, the storms harsher, and the magic surrounding the child more pronounced. The fortress itself seemed to respond to the unborn pup, corridors creaking as if alive, shadows moving in ways that defied explanation. Leora felt the pulse of ancient power, dark yet compelling, wrapping around her and the child like a living force. The Alpha King stayed close, offering guidance, protection, and the silent weight of presence. Leora's initial distrust slowly wove itself into something fragile yet undeniable. But she found herself noticing him in ways she had not expected, the way his jaw tightened when angered, the way his eyes softened when he thought no one watched, the rare fleeting smile that hinted at a man beneath the crown, beneath the legend, beneath the power. Yet danger was never far. One night, as snow piled thick against the fortress walls, Leora heard whispers in the darkness. Figures moved silently through the hallways, shadows bending unnaturally around them. Her pulse raced, a familiar fear threading through her. "They are inside," she whispered to herself, clutching her stomach. The Alpha King appeared at the doorway, eyes sharp as blades. "We cannot let them reach the child," he said. "Tonight, the test begins." The hours stretched, tense and unyielding. Leora moved like a shadow herself, blending with the night, her senses sharpened by fear, training, and determination. She watched, waited, and when the shadowed figures appeared, she struck with the ferocity of a mother protecting her own. The battle was swift, brutal, and silent, carried out in the shadows of the hallways. Leora fought with everything she had, every swing of her blade fueled by desperation and love. The Alpha King was beside her, their movements almost synchronized, cutting through danger with lethal precision. When the last shadow fell, silence returned. Only the snow outside whispered against the fortress walls. Leora sank to the floor, trembling, sweat and snow melting together on her skin. She felt the child stir, small yet insistent, a heartbeat like a drum of hope. The Alpha King knelt beside her again, his expression softening, though still edged with command. "You are remarkable," he said quietly. "And yet, this is only the beginning." Leora looked up at him, exhaustion and relief mingling in her gaze. "Then we fight again," she said, voice steady despite the tremor in her limbs. "Whatever comes, we will endure." The fortress walls had held, but only just. The danger, she knew, was far from over. Her pack's betrayal had been only the first test. Now, the forces gathering against her, against the child, and against the Alpha King, were more cunning, more powerful, and more relentless. And in the depths of the fortress, in the shadows that moved like living things, eyes watched. Patience, cruelty, and ancient power coiled around them like a snake. They would wait, they would strike, and they would not leave until the child and Leora belonged to them. Leora clutched her stomach, feeling the tiny heartbeat inside her, and understood something she had only begun to realize. Survival alone would not be enough. She would need strength, courage, and a trust she had never allowed herself before. And in that moment she knew the true battle was just beginning. The wind had shifted. Outside, the snowstorm no longer roared like a wild beast, but moved in slow, deliberate swirls across the frozen highlands. The fortress of the Alpha King stood silent against the pale morning light, its towers jagged and proud against the gray sky. Yet inside, the air was electric with tension. Leora knew the storm that had been gathering, the one beyond the snow, beyond the walls and within the shadows of those who sought the child, was about to strike. She moved through the corridors with careful steps, hand resting protectively over her stomach. The child within her was restless, as if sensing the gathering danger. Every heartbeat reminded her of her promise. She would survive, and she would protect this life at any cost. The Alpha King followed silently, his presence both shield and weight. His eyes were sharp, reflecting the light of torches along the hall. He carried the air of command he always did, yet tonight there was something more, a tension, an almost unspoken fear, and a resolve that matched her own. "They are coming," he said quietly, his voice low and steady. "Psst. And this time they will not hold back. You must be ready." Bed. Leora swallowed hard, nodding. "I am ready," she said, though her stomach churned with anxiety. "We will protect it, whatever it takes." He studied her for a moment, eyes softened by something she could not name. Then he nodded once, sharply, and the silence returned. The first wave of shadows arrived, just as the pale sun kissed the high walls of the fortress. Figures cloaked in darkness, moving like whispers against the stone, slipped over battlements and through secret doors. Their eyes glowed faintly, unnatural in the morning light, and magic hung thick in the air. Leora drew her blade, feeling the familiar surge of strength coursing through her veins. Beside her, the Alpha King readied his own weapon, every muscle taut, every motion precise. Together they faced the storm, a bond forged in frost, betrayal and quiet trust. The battle began silently but with ferocious intensity. Shadows moved like water around them, striking in waves, testing their defenses. Leora's heart pounded, adrenaline and determination blending with the quiet, insistent life growing within her. Each strike of her blade, each parry, was fueled not by anger alone, but by love, protection, and survival. The Alpha King moved beside her like a force of nature, cutting through the attackers with calm, deadly precision. Their movements became almost instinctive, a rhythm born of countless hours of shared struggle and unspoken understanding. Every shadow that fell was a reminder of what they fought for: the child, their future, and the fragile hope that they could survive together. But the shadows were not just soldiers. They were magic, ancient and cruel, and they twisted the air around them with power. One figure, taller and darker than the rest, emerged from the group. Its eyes burned with a fire that seemed older than the mountains themselves. "This ends now," the Alpha King said, voice resonant, carrying authority that echoed through the hall. Leora stepped forward, her blade steady. "Together," she whispered. And in that moment there was no fear, only resolve. The figure lunged, a wave of darkness crashing toward them. Leora met it head-on, parrying with every ounce of strength she had. The Alpha King moved simultaneously, striking with a force that made the air crackle. Magic and steel collided, sparks flying, shadows twisting and screaming in frustration. Time stretched. Hours or minutes, it was impossible to tell. Leora felt the child stir, as if sensing the danger and responding with a small, powerful pulse of energy that rippled through her. She realized then that this life was more than fragile. It was strong, ancient even, a spark that connected to the forces that sought to destroy them. With a surge of determination, Leora pressed forward, every movement a combination of instinct, skill, and maternal courage. The Alpha King mirrored her strikes, each one deliberate, each one protecting both her and the child. Together, they became a single force, unyielding and impossible to break. The taller, shattered figure staggered, its magic faltering. The Alpha King's eyes burned with command as he struck with precision, sending the figure crashing against the stone walls. Leora, heart racing, moved in to ensure it could not rise again. Silence fell. The echoes of battle lingered, but the fortress stood, intact and victorious. The shadows had been driven back, their magic dispersed, and the threat had been held at bay. Leora sank to her knees, breathing heavily, her hands instinctively over her stomach. The Alpha King knelt beside her, placing a steadying hand on her shoulder. Desk, his eyes so often sharp and commanding, now held something softer: pride, relief, and the beginnings of trust. "You have done it," he said, voice low and steady. "You protected what matters most." Leora's lips trembled. "We did it!" she said, finally acknowledging the bond they had forged through fire, frost, and fear. Together, they remained there for a long moment, the fortress silent, but for their breathing. Outside, the snow had calmed, settling into a quiet peace, as if the world itself recognized their victory. Days passed after the battle, and with each day the bond between Leora and the Alpha King deepened. No longer was it only tension or unspoken curiosity. It became trust, respect, and the faintest flicker of something warmer, gentler, yet powerful in its own way. They trained together, planned together, and shared quiet moments where words were not necessary to understand each other. The fortress itself seemed to respond to this new balance. The halls no longer felt oppressive, but alive, echoing with life and the promise of new beginnings. Leora could feel the strength of the child growing within her, a rhythm that matched the pulse of the fortress and the mountains beyond. One evening, as the sky turned to gold and silver in the twilight, the Alpha King walked beside her along the ramparts. Snow glimmered in the dying light, and the highlands stretched endlessly before them. "You have changed this place," he said quietly, eyes on the horizon. "And in doing so, you have changed me." Leora turned to him, surprised at the honesty in his voice. "You were already strong," she said softly. "I only helped you see what mattered." He smiled faintly, a rare, fleeting thing. "Perhaps, but you have also changed yourself. You are no longer the one left to die in the snow. Ja, you are more. Fry. A quiet peace settled over them. Yet it was tempered by the awareness that the world beyond the fortress remained dangerous. Rebellion, betrayal, and the echoes of ancient magic would always exist. But for the first time, Leora felt that they were not alone in facing it. Together, they were a force strong enough to endure whatever storms came. Weeks later, when the snow finally began to melt and the first signs of spring appeared in the highlands, Leora felt the first true movement of the child. Tiny but insistent, it seemed to reach for the world, and she placed a hand over her stomach, whispering promises of protection, love, and guidance. The Alpha King knelt beside her, placing his hands over hers. "We will face this world together," he said, voice steady, full of resolve and warmth. Leora nodded, feeling the pulse of life beneath their hands. "Together," she repeated, her voice firm. "No matter what comes." And for the first time since the blizzard that had left her alone, Leora felt truly safe, truly seen, and truly alive. The fortress, the mountains, the snow, they were no longer threats, but part of a world she would help shape. A world she would defend, not just for herself, but for the life she carried, and for the bond she had forged with the Alpha King. The highlands stretched endlessly beyond the walls, bathed in pale sunlight. Shadows still lingered in the distance, reminders of the dangers yet to come. But Leora, hand in hand with the Alpha King, faced the horizon with courage, hope, and the certainty that whatever storms might rise, they would endure them together. And in the quiet of the fortress, in the warmth of the hearth, and in the heartbeat of the child she carried, Leora knew one undeniable truth. Survival had led to something far greater than life alone. It had led to love, trust, and a new beginning that neither snow, shadow, nor betrayal could ever take away.
The Alpha King placed a gentle hand on her shoulder, his eyes meeting hers with an intensity softened by respect and something more profound.
"We are no longer bound by fear," he said, "but by choice. By what we have built together." Dusky Leora smiled faintly, feeling the strength of the child stir beneath her palm. "Then let the world come," she whispered. "We are ready." The wind outside shifted once more, carrying the scent of thawing snow and promise. The fortress stood, proud and enduring, and the highlands beyond seemed to acknowledge that a new chapter had begun, not one of betrayal or fear, but of hope, courage, and the eternal bond forged between two hearts in the frost. The Alpha King and Leora stood together, looking over the mountains, their hands brushing, their hearts steady, and the first cry of the pup echoed faintly from within her, a song of life, survival, and the promise of all that was yet to come. For they had endured the storm, faced the shadows, and found something stronger than fear: each other. And so, in the highlands of Arindor, amidst frost, shadow, and the whisper of snow, a legend began. Not of betrayal or loss, but of redemption, love, and the eternal bond that could not be broken.